So, I'm going to be going to Japan in a week with a bunch of people for like this work thing. And then I thought, well, I should teach them some useful phrases in Japanese. But then I thought, oh, I'll make a video. So here is useful Japanese phrases for tourists. The first useful phrase is Sumimasen. Sumimasen. And it means pardon me or excuse me. And in fact, sometimes it's even used for thank you. So like in America, if you spill something and then somebody hands you a towel, you might say thank you. But in Japan, you would say, oh, excuse me or pardon me. And the reason is Japan is a culture of obligation, has this culture of obligation. And so if you actually thank somebody for something, then you are now obligated to do something of equal or commensurate value in return. And it gets really complicated and all this other stuff. So people generally try to avoid it by just saying, sumimasen. But if somebody like does you a real solid or something and you just really want to thank them, then you could say arigato, arigato. Or domo arigato for more emphasis. Or if it's for something in particular in the past, domo arigato gozaimashita. Or more colloquially, you could just say domo. But, I mean, you're a foreigner, so you could just say arigato, and they'll basically get the idea. A very useful pattern is something like, sumimasen, eki wa doko desu ka? Sumimasen, eki wa doko desu ka? Which means, where's the train station? Eki being the train station. And I use train station because train stations are kind of the center of activity in a lot of Japanese cities. And so if you can find the train station, you can find pretty much everything else that's important that you need to find in that area. Another one would be, sumimasen, koban wa doko desu ka? Koban is a police box or place basically where police officers kind of hang out and help out with whatever civic needs come up. And so if you get into trouble, you could say, sumimasen, koban wa doko desu ka? Or another one would be, sumimasen, toire wa doko desu ka? Toire being the word for toilet, or comes from the word toilet. And there's also a more polite form, which is otearai, which means hand washing area or restroom. But you're more likely to remember toire because it sounds like toilet than you are to remember otearai, which is the hand washing word in Japanese. Another useful phrase, sumimasen, kore ikura desu ka? Sumimasen, kore ikura desu ka? As in, excuse me, how much is this thing? To be honest, you could probably say this in English and they'll figure it out or they'll know the phrase. But I don't know, it's kind of cool to say stuff in Japanese every once in a while. Now, there is a chance that if you say that in Japanese, they'll quote you a price in Japanese. But at that point, you can just go like, ah. And then they'll figure out, oh, you just know that phrase, but you don't know the numbers. And then they'll just write it down on a piece of paper or a calculator or something and then show you. So anyways, sumimasen, kore ikura desu ka? Oh, Japan is very much a cash-based society. So there are places that are going to accept credit cards like any of the larger department stores or restaurants or hotels. But for the most part, cash is always preferred. And it's a very safe country as well. So you can feel comfortable carrying around a larger amount of cash than you would normally at home. And although it is very safe, there are some pervy dudes. So like it's very, very rare. But if it happens, then just like call them out on it. Like if somebody grabs your butt on the train or something, just call them out, grab their hand and say like, whose hand is this? Or like, who touched my butt? And it'll do two things. One, it'll call attention to the person who did it. And two, hopefully embarrass them enough because they weren't expecting somebody to actually react to it, that it'll help prevent that sort of thing from happening in the future. Although, again, super rare, so I don't expect anybody to actually run into that. Suppose you're in a situation where you really need to talk to somebody in English. Then you would say, sumimasen, 英語わかりますか? すみません。英語わかりますか? And you're probably going to get a reaction like this, or maybe something like this. And the reason is, Japanese people really like to know what to do at all times. Like there's an appropriate reaction or an appropriate behavior for pretty much every given situation. And the appropriate behavior for somebody asking you something in English is to respond to them in English. But most Japanese people don't speak English that well. I mean, like, how many languages do you speak? I don't speak Spanish, and I'm living in California like my whole life. And yet I hear it all the time. It would be super useful, but I just don't. So it's kind of embarrassing. But Japan kind of takes that to the next level. And so, like, there's a general fear of speaking in public places. This is kind of that multiplied times 10. So don't be discouraged if, like, the first few times you say, すみません、英語わかりますか? If people just run away like the first 100 times or so. But eventually you'll find somebody who does, especially if you go to like a department store or a train station or like a police box or something where they're like more official people. Then usually they'll either know somebody who speaks English or speak English themselves. So, useful phrase. すみません、 Eigo wakarimasu ka? On a related note, if you happen to be Asian and you're traveling in Japan, there's a chance that people are going to think you're Japanese because you look Japanese. And so if that happens, this is a very useful phrase. I do not speak Japanese. I mean, there is actually a Japanese phrase for that, but if you really want to convey that you don't speak Japanese, it's best to not say it in Japanese. If you're curious, the phrase is Nihongo hanashimasen. I do not speak Japanese. Or Nihongo wakarimasen. Wakarimasen, as in I don't understand Japanese. But then you get this confusing thing where like, oh, you look Asian and you said something in Japanese, so why don't you understand the rest of what I'm saying? Which has actually happened to people that I've known. So better off just say, I don't speak Japanese, and then they'll kind of get the hint, even if they don't understand what you're saying. If you're about to eat a meal, a polite thing to say before the meal starts is itadakimasu, itadakimasu, which means I'm about to eat. And so it's a very simple phrase, but it kind of is ingrained in part of the Japanese culture to say that at the beginning of every meal as a way to show thanks for the meal itself and also for the person who made the effort to make the meal. And then at the end of the meal, you might say, "Gochusou-sama deshita," "Gochusou-sama deshita," or "Gochusou-sama," which just means it was a feast. And you would say that regardless of what the meal was. But it's kind of, again, a way to show appreciation for the meal itself and also for the person who prepared the meal for you. And actually, on a related note, if you're at a restaurant, especially if like at a sushi place or something like that, don't ask for like extra ginger or extra wasabi, because it's kind of like saying, I don't know, going to a steak shop and saying like asking for ketchup to pour on the steak. It's generally considered like kind of crude and boorish because you're there to appreciate the taste of the fish and the rice, and adding more and more stuff to it kind of indicates that you didn't like the fish or the rice or the other stuff. And on a similar note, if you're at a restaurant and you get one of these, like, you break it apart and then you might clean it a little bit, but then don't like spend an excessive amount of time cleaning it, because every time you do this, you're kind of saying like, yeah, your chopsticks are really, really crappy chopsticks, and I gotta wipe off all the splinters of here before I even try to eat this. So I mean, it's okay to like split it and like, do a quick wipe off or whatever, but like, just try to keep it to a minimum, and then eat. Itadakimasu. Now, gochusou-sama deshita. On a related note, don't eat or drink while you're walking. And by that I mean, like, it's common in America to like go to the coffee shop and grab a coffee and then drink it while you're walking to work. In Japan, don't do that. And the reason is it's a lot more crowded in Japan, and so people bump into each other pretty frequently, and so there's a greater chance of you spilling your food or drink on other people. And even if you don't, you're making other people accommodate you for the fact that you're, got a food or drink in your hand while you're walking. So generally, just don't eat or drink unless you're specifically at a festival where that's the sort of thing that people are doing. And so for this, basically just look and see what other people are doing. If you're about to meet somebody for the first time, a nice thing to say is hajimemashite. Hajimemashite. And that's just a polite way of saying it's the first time that we're meeting, which is kind of nice. And then if you want to get a little fancier, you could also say Dozle yoroshiku. Dozle yoroshiku, which means I hope that we will treat each other. Actually, I don't even know what it means. I should look that up. Hold on. So I looked up Dozle yoroshiku, and it means please treat me favorably, or please be kind to me. But essentially it just means like, hey, yeah, I hope this goes well. Here's how Japanese people say yes. Hai. Here's how they say no. Actually, they don't generally say no. There is a word for it, which is iie, but you like almost never hear it. In fact, in general, most of the time they'll just kind of equivocate, or they'll hem and ha. They'll say something like, chotto, as in like, oh, there's a little problem with that, ... Or, so desu ne, as in like, yeah. And so the idea is like, it's kind of hard to say no in Japan because it's considered rude to refuse somebody. So instead what they'll do is they'll kind of like not say anything for a while and then hope that you get the hint. So, be aware of that. And one last general tip, don't tip in Japan. It's just not part of the culture. It's considered kind of weird to like give people money in addition to what they're already paid for their jobs. So yeah, just don't tip. And that's pretty much it. This has been useful Japanese phrases for tourists. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun in Japan! So if you're about to meet somebody, then a nice thing to say before that... if you're about to meet somebody for the first time, a nice thing to say is, oh shoot, I forgot. What? What? I was about to record my next thing. Okay. So if you're at a restaurant or about to start a meal, do you want to be in the video, Dyson?